Gowan Pamphlet is a name you probably never really heard of or even read about in your history textbook. Being an enslaved, ordained African-American Baptist preacher, well, he shouldn't have been mentioned, but he was. Not only by his contemporaries, but also by historians after him. In spite of the status as a slave and a Baptist preacher in the 18th century, he still made enough of an impact to influence American history as a whole. Hello, my name is Joe. I work at Colonial Williamsburg, and this is a snapshot of Gowan Pamphlet.
Sit down, sit down. Sit down and take your rest.
My job at Colonial Williamsburg is portraying the young Gowan Pamphlet, and while it is an engaging and interesting job, it does offer its own set of unique challenges, not least of which, of course, portraying an enslaved individual in the 18th century, but also trying to, find information about an enslaved individual. Most information that we have about anyone who was enslaved during this time, comes from their owners. Anything from a runaway ad found in a newspaper, a bill of sale about how much they were bought and sold at an auction, or even listed just as a piece of property on their owner's inventory record list. But in the case of Gowan, we have more information than that. In the case of Gowan, we have people writing about him, not only from his owners, but also from fellow Baptist preachers, not least of which, of course, from Robert B. Semple. The Reverend Robert B. Semple was a Baptist historian. He's actually known as the father of history of Baptists in Virginia because of his own work called A History of the Rise and Progress of Baptists in Virginia, written around 1810. In his history book, he basically talks about how different Baptist congregations began and how they flourished from different parts of Virginia, from different counties, from different cities, and of course, he has one in Williamsburg about Gowan's church, the First Baptist Church in Williamsburg. Here's a bit of an excerpt from his history about Gowan's church from his book, and I want to notice some of the challenges that Gowan faced just beginning as a pastor that were basically really unique to an enslaved Baptist preacher. Quote, "It seems the association had advised that no person of color should be allowed to preach on the pain of excommunication. Against this regulation, many of the blacks were rebellious and continued still to hold meetings. Some were excluded, and among this number was Gowan just mentioned. Continuing still to preach, and many professing faith under his ministry, not being in connection with any church himself, he formed a kind of church of some who had been baptized, who, sitting with him, received such as offered themselves. Gowan baptized them, and was moreover appointed their pastor." End quote. So we see here that even in spite of Gowan's great ministry and apparently reaching a large number of enslaved African Americans, the association who recognized him at first didn't recognize him. They said that any person of color should not be allowed to preach. But Gowan, in spite of all that, continued to preach the good news. He continued to preach the gospel. As anything, if you read this, then they may bring upon the illusion of what was written in the book of Acts, chapter 5, verses 27-29. When Peter and the other apostles were charged with preaching, they were brought before the Sanhedrin council in Jerusalem. And basically the Sanhedrin told Peter and the apostles, stop preaching. This Jesus which you preach of, stop preaching this. But in response to that, Peter the apostle said in this famous verse, in verse 29, "We will obey God rather than man." Clearly that is what Gowan did. In spite of what even some of the fellow Baptists said about that he could not preach, he still continued to preach the gospel. Because Gowan knew, in spite of that challenge, that he knew that this word, this gospel, was an objective truth. An objective truth to unite all people from every tongue, every tribe, every creed, and understanding that, yes, the same Jesus was the one who says in the book of John that people will know that you are his disciples by the way you love. And that's exactly what Gowan did. He showed that he had love for his own congregants, and in spite of what other Baptists and even what other people said that he could not preach, he still decided to preach the good news. And this is the kind of man that Gowan was, in spite of his status as a slave, and despite his status as being a fringe denomination of the Baptist faith. But there's more to be said about Gowan, and I hope and pray that I'm able to get to them all. But in the meantime, I wish you to really look into more of Robert Semple's history about Baptists in Virginia. You can go ahead and look at his own book, but also look at colonialwilliamsburg.org to see more information about Gowan Pamphlet and the Baptist faith in Virginia. Also, I also recommend you read the book of John in the Bible. It also shows about what Gowan actually read himself about that commandment about how you will know that you are Christ's disciples by the way you love. My name is Joe, and I hope and pray that you're all doing well, and I hope to see you all soon. Be blessed.